There's a hidden war right next door to the United States, largely unnoticed by many Americans. Since 2006, Mexico has been in a relentless battle against powerful drug cartels. What started with President Felipe Calderón's bold move to deploy 50,000 soldiers has spiraled into a deadly conflict, claiming over 360,000 lives. These cartels, shattered into smaller and more violent factions, now wage war not just against the Mexican government, but also among themselves, vying for control of lucrative drug routes into the US. Armed with sophisticated US military-grade weapons, these criminal organizations have evolved into quasi-military forces. But how did this happen? What kind of arsenal do these cartels possess? And how did they transform from local gangs into militarized powerhouses? Stay with us as we uncover the shocking reality behind the Mexican cartel's war machine and explore the dangerous implications for the US. Although organized crime has existed in Mexico for many years, the rise of that country's drug cartels as groups powerful enough to challenge the state's authority began in the 1990s. At that time, the United States focused its anti-drug efforts on destroying Colombia's cartels. This policy was generally successful. Most notably, the infamous Medellin cartel of Pablo Escobar met its end with his death in 1993. However, the drug trade didn't magically disappear with him. It was rerouted through Mexico. The Sinaloa, Gulf, and Juarez cartels were all conceived during these years, as the lucrative drug trafficking revenues transformed local gangs into fully fledged transnational criminal organizations. The United States responded by shifting its counter-drug efforts to its neighbor next door. This focus included helping to train the Mexican military. Unfortunately, this focus would produce unforeseen and devastating consequences. Mexico's Airborne Special Forces Group was one of the units that received instruction by the US Army at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, since renamed Fort Liberty. There they were trained in counterinsurgency and counter-drug operations, training which would prepare them for things to come. In 1997, 31 members of this unit, which was considered one of the most elite in the Mexican military, defected and began working as a mercenary force for Ociel Cardenas Guillen, the leader of the Gulf cartel at the time. After he was arrested in 2003, these 31 defectors seized their chance to go their own way. With an initial roster of 300 members, the Los Zetas cartel was born. The rise of Los Zetas dramatically changed the nature of the war on drugs in Mexico. The business became much more violent and brutal. Prior to Zetas, Mexico's drug cartels relied on bribery and corruption as the preferred method of operations. They resorted to violence only as a secondary method. Moreover, certain targets like pregnant women were considered off-limits. The Los Zetas cartel discarded all of that. It relied on fear and brutal acts of intimidation to expand its reach. One notable example occurred in their early days. In 2006, as the organization was staking out its identity, it captured 2 Mexican police officers in Acapulco. These men were decapitated, and the Zetas left a message behind: "So you learn to respect us." The Zetas engaged in indiscriminate acts of torture and mass slaughter. These were military men, and they took a military approach to taking control of the territory. They would take and hold it by force and fear. The Zetas were not simply a band of highly trained thugs. They were well armed and equipped. They came with automatic weapons, RPGs, and hand grenades. They used those grenades to send another brutal message during an Independence Day celebration in September 2008, when they threw them into a parade. The attack left 8 people dead and over 100 injured. The Zetas had demonstrated their ability to create mass casualty events, as the armed forces of a state are capable of doing on the battlefield. Unsurprisingly, Mexico's drug disputes grew far more violent once Los Zetas arrived on the scene, and far more people were getting killed in them. Los Zetas' communications and ability to coordinate their activities were also highly sophisticated, reflecting their military origins. By 2010, the Los Zetas cartel had expanded to 405 municipalities in Mexico, a reach that was over twice as large as its nearest rivals. The cartel established operations that ran from Venezuela and Colombia to the United States, and even into Europe and West Africa. This would prove to be the high point for the Zetas, though. In the following years, the cartel would fragment, as pressure from both the Mexican government and rival TCOs would take their toll. By the end of the decade, all of the leaders of Los Zetas were dead or in prison. Central unity broke down, and today, splinter groups are confined to small territories, where they get most of their money from local criminal revenues, like the extortion of nearby businesses. They've been mostly cut off from the big business of transnational drug trafficking. Although Los Zetas cartel may be over as a unified organization, it succeeded in changing organized crime in Mexico. Today's cartels have none of the scruples that their 1990s and early 2000s era predecessors did. Acts of brutality and intimidation are the preferred methods of exerting influence and controlling territory. The other cartels and their successors learned from Los Zetas and adopted their tactics and weapons. The Zetas set off an arms race among the cartels, and that race continues to this day. The arms race was on display in January 2024 when a column of Mexican soldiers had the misfortune of running into an improvised landmine. This was no small IED of the type so often seen by American forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. The explosion, captured on social media, was powerful enough to send a soldier flying. He died and 4 others suffered injuries. A month later, a similar incident occurred. This time, 4 Mexican soldiers died and 9 others suffered wounds. Both blasts occurred in an area along the border between the states of Jalisco and Michoacán in southern Mexico. This is a hotspot for cartel activity. The use of these landmines marks the latest evolution in the arms race between the cartels that the Zetas began 20 years ago. The Jalisco New Generation cartel is believed to have been responsible for the weapon. This cartel has replaced Los Zetas as the most infamous in Mexico. It's now considered the biggest criminal drug threat to the United States, and Mexican officials consider it their country's biggest internal security risk. The use of landmines only reinforced that notion. Some of the mines the Jalisco cartel use are set off by tripwires that are sensitive enough to be triggered by pedestrian foot traffic. For the cartels, using landmines makes a lot of sense. They're lethal and can be used without engaging in direct contact with one's enemy. They're also an ideal way to fortify your own territory. Their use is growing. Between August 2021 and July 23, Mexican authorities deactivated 2,241 of these landmines. They were spread over 17 states, with the bulk concentrated in Michoacán. These mines are also associated with foreign mercenaries from Colombia. Since landmines like this have played an important role in that country's long-running civil war, it's not surprising that these mercenaries have brought this technology with them. One local described the situation in an interview with the LA Times. There's always been a conflict with shootouts and displacements, but lately you see other kinds of people who aren't from here, who have a different accent. The rise of these mercenaries is tied to the 2016 ceasefire agreement between the Colombian government and the FARC, the nation's largest leftist guerrilla group. The ceasefire left many of the combatants without anything to do. Naturally, they used their connections in the international drug trade and found new work in Mexico. The new arrivals from Colombia have brought other weapons like improvised mortars and drone-drop bomblets. The cartels have also used grenade launchers. But the cartels don't limit themselves to these improvised explosives. Some of them have access to military-grade explosives. For example, suspected members of the Gulf Cartel were arrested in the city of Reynosa on the US border in 2018. These men were carrying 2 M18A1 Claymore mines. The cartels have outfitted themselves with the weaponry to make their armies true combined arms operations. Weaponized drones, rigged with the bomblets the Colombian mercenaries brought with them, recall what Ukraine has proposed to do with its own drones. The Ukrainians have requested the bomblets from the CBU-100 Rockeye-2 cluster bomb to drop from drones onto Russian armored columns. The United States has denied this request so far, but the drug cartels seem to be picking up the tactic. Mexican authorities claim that the use of these bomb-dropping drones is brand new. The tactic was never reported in Mexico before 2020. Between January and August 2023, though, over 260 such incidents were recorded, and that may be an undercount because the figures only include those who were wounded in these attacks. However, at least 1 officer in Mexico's National Guard and 4 state police officers were killed in another 2 incidents. Overall, Mexican authorities found 556 improvised explosive devices of all types, ranging from landmines to car bombs to drone-drop munitions in the first 8 months of 2023. Over 1,411 were found during the presidency of Manuel López Obrador. Half of these IEDs were found in the aforementioned Michoacán, which is seeing a bloody war between the Jalisco cartel and a coalition of opposing cartels. Mexico's Secretary of Defense, Luis Crescencio Sandoval, said that the explosives frequently failed to detonate because they were all homemade, based on tutorials that were found on the internet. Some of them were made with blasting compounds stolen from mines, but others were more primitive, even using black powder as the means of detonation. Although some of these devices might lack sophistication, they are no less deadly. In July 2023, 7 roadway bombs were used in a trap that killed 4 police officers and 2 civilians. The cartels are not limited to these primitive bombs. Some of the drones are armed with more powerful explosives like C4 or TOVEX. Other drones are armed with hand grenades. These explosives may come from the Mexican military. At least 1 former Mexican Marine is known to have conducted drone attacks with these weapons for the Jalisco cartel. The cartels have used drones in other ways, such as tracking law enforcement personnel, including across the border. In the Rio Grande Valley sector of Texas alone, US Customs and Border Protection officials recorded 25,000 drone sightings and 10,000 incursions between 2022 and 23. The cartels don't limit themselves to small FPV drones either. Larger drones that can carry heavy payloads have also been used. If need be, these have the potential to carry air-to-surface missiles like Hellfires. Fortunately, the cartels have not reached that point yet, but they are becoming increasingly sophisticated with their weapons on the ground too. The cartels have begun fielding their own armored columns. These vehicles are locally known as monsters. They come equipped with steel plating and 50 caliber machine gun turrets. They are resistant to many types of small arms fire and require increasingly heavier weapons to be combated effectively. The cartels are also arming themselves with increasingly more powerful small arms. These TCOs are as sophisticated in smuggling weapons as people and drugs, and their arsenals reflect this. In March 2024, US federal authorities busted a major gun-running operation, including 100 weapons that were destined for the cartels. These firearms included 50 caliber M107 Barrett sniper rifles. The Barrett has an effective range of about 2,000 meters and is used by the US military primarily as an anti-materiel rifle. However, it's more than capable of functioning in anti-personnel roles. Some of the longest recorded sniper kills have been through the use of this weapon, including the third longest on record, which took place in Afghanistan in 2012 in the hands of an Australian sniper. The demand for the Barrett among the cartels signals that they are training their own long-range sharpshooters that can engage in anti-material and anti-personnel missions. Other weapons seized in March include the FNH SCAR. The Belgian company FN Herstal created this weapon in 2004, primarily for use with special operations forces. It's primarily used with a 7.62 by 51mm NATO round, although it can also use 5.56 by 45mm round in its light configuration. If needed, this rifle is compatible with a grenade launcher that the company claims can be rapidly attached. FN also claims that minimal training time is required to use this weapon effectively. Over 20 countries have it in their arsenal. The FNH M294S is a light machine gun that the US Armed Forces have used since the 1980s. It's chambered for the 5.56 by 45mm NATO round. It's belt-fed and can fire 850 rounds per minute, up to an effective range between 700 and 800 meters. The M1919 was a machine gun that saw service in the US military in the first half of the 20th century. It was originally chambered for the .3006 round, but many countries still use it today after converting it to the 7.62mm NATO round. It's belt-fed and can fire between 400 and 600 rounds per minute. 5 men were arrested in connection with the trafficking ring. These were straw purchases, the act of buying a gun for another person who is legally prohibited from owning a weapon or doesn't want to be associated with the transaction. Straw purchasing became a crime in 2022 with the passage of a gun control bill following the massacre at an elementary school in Uvalde, Texas that May. The straw purchasers allegedly bought the guns from unlicensed dealers, one of whom was named as a defendant in the complaint. The official federal criminal complaint describes the state of the Mexican drug war with the entry of these weapons. They are symbols of cartel profit, power, and prestige, due in part to their high price to purchase and operate. Mexican drug trafficking cartels use these weapons to engage in battles with their enemies and exert control over their claimed territory. The March 2024 bust was one of only many. In recent years, Mexican authorities have increasingly seized military-grade weapons. The Mexican Defense Department has warned its northern counterpart that it's often finding weapons on Mexican territory that were meant for the exclusive use of the US Army. Last June, Mexican authorities claimed that they had seized 221 fully automatic machine guns, 56 grenade launchers, and a dozen rocket launchers in recent years. 5 of the rocket launchers were found in the hands of the Jalisco cartel, 4 were seized from the Sinaloa cartel, and 3 more from other cartels. The cartels often brag about these weapons and share pictures of them on social media. Unsurprisingly, Mexico wants an urgent investigation about how all these weapons are winding up in the cartel's hands. Ken Salazar, the US ambassador to Mexico, confirmed that the issue had been raised with him. Much of the traffic in firearms across the border comes with standard-issue civilian semi-automatic rifles being smuggled into Mexico through the United States. Mexico has sued American weapons manufacturers and gun shops, claiming that they contribute to the country's violence. The cartels have certainly altered some of these weapons to make them fully automatic. However, this is likely not the route the cartels use to get the most sophisticated military-grade hardware. Trafficking through Central America is another way the cartels are getting their hands on military-grade US weapons. This is a legacy of the Cold War, as the United States often armed factions there to battle communist influence. The best example will be the Salvadorian Civil War between 1979 and 1992, when the United States armed the Salvadoran government against leftist guerrillas. These leftover weapons have made their way to the cartels. Corruption north of the border also likely plays a role. Mexico's cartels have targeted officials in the United States. A decade ago, the US Department of Homeland Security reported that about 2,000 law enforcement officials were under investigation for involvement in organized crime. Unsurprisingly, these investigations concentrated in Texas. It's likely that some of the military-grade weapons the cartels have gotten their hands on come from corruption north of the border. The cartels have become increasingly proficient at combining these arms together in coherent operations. At the start of the year, violence rocked the town of Helidoro, Callisto, which is one of the suburbs of the city of Tlacotepec in the state of Guerrero in southwestern Mexico. On January 5th, drones and gunmen carried out a coordinated attack on at least 30 people there. Information and communication security is essential for any armed force, and today's cartels have learned from the example of the Los Zetas set. They've constructed their own Wi-Fi networks and financed them with fees extorted from locals. To more effectively launder money, the cartels have expanded into legal industries like the avocado trade. Mexico's TCOs have also forged alliances with their counterparts in other regions, especially China's triads, from which they source the chemicals for fentanyl, but also many counterfeit goods. Before their demise, the Los Zetas cartel had an alliance with Chinese gangs in Latin America, getting a cut from groups distributing pirated software. As these organizations tend to have close ties to the Chinese Communist Party, Mexico's drug cartels could find themselves armed with even more sophisticated equipment in exchange for the resources that Beijing finds desirable. At one point, the La Familia Michoacana cartel had engaged in illegal mining, with the proceeds being exported to China. Shortly after this arrangement, ties between the cartels and Chinese organized crime grew as the fentanyl crisis began to blow up. The cartels are no longer enterprises running operations through bribery and the untrained, but small-scale violence through the employment of local thugs. These are sprawling criminal enterprises with essentially private armies, effective enough to wage war and control territory with. The cartels don't have the firepower to stand up to the Mexican military yet, but they now often outclass Mexican law enforcement in weaponry and sophistication. This is a problem for the country's ability to wind down its drug war, because it means that these TCOs can now only be controlled through extreme force. Outgoing Mexican President Obrador once described his security policy as being based on hugs not bullets. However, the homicide rate in Mexico has remained at historic highs since he took office. His incoming successor, President-elect Claudia Sheinbaum, successfully reduced the homicide rate during her time as mayor of Mexico City from 17.9 to 8.6 per 100,000 between 2018 and 22. Only time will tell if she is as successful nationwide, but she will be facing a network of cartels far more powerful than any of her predecessors have ever encountered. What do you think of the prospects of Mexico's incoming president against the cartels? What might they do next? How might the United States get involved? Don't forget to let us know in the comments, and also make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more military analysis from military experts. Now go and check out what's stopping the US Army from attacking Mexican cartels, or click this other video instead.